climate change when they thought about it as a local phenomenon, something happening right here in our backyards. So we, as a group of scientists, artists, and researchers.
Well, geez, there, I don't know what happened with that emergency broadcast, but anyway, welcome to Tea and Tapas and
Climate change.
Oops, I really don't know what that was going on with that emergency broadcast. But anyway, welcome to Tea and Tapas here at the Wisconsin Center for Environmental Education LEAF program. And it's not really there, it's in my house. And we actually have a special Tea and Tapas storefront in my back that we're gonna look at a little bit later. But I just wanted to welcome everyone, and we're going to be talking about storylines, and our featured tea and tapas are maple syrup. So we're in March Madness. It's a super fun season, and it's great basketball, though that's getting a little bit later nowadays. And we also have raspberries as our tea and tapas. So this is with LEAF, and for those that don't know, we have professional development for educators. There's curriculum materials, we have forestry supplies, and a lot of support for outdoor classrooms, and you'll see some of those kind of throughout. And if you have any questions, just check out our website or contact any of us at LEAF. And I wanted to just let folks know that this is going to be recorded, and so if that's a problem, just let us know, and we can try and edit things out or make sure that you're comfortable with how it's being recorded. But I really wanted to talk about this tea and tapas in March that I mentioned, March Madness. And as I'm doing this, we're going to go to the storefront just to see what we have. And because we had maple syrup and raspberries, which are super cool, which the seasonal thing of raspberries, let me grab one of them from the store. Though they have pokies, so you just gotta look out, and they kind of got stuck to my window. But the part that we're actually using right now in the raspberries is the, where can I line this up? Where's my camera? Okay, the bud. This is harder than it looks. There we go. And you can actually just pop that thing off and eat it, and it's a little pack of nutrition. It's not like one of those things that you're like, this is delicious. But if you think back to spring and how you probably were like pretty low on food, a little pack of nutrition wouldn't be too bad. So that's one of our features. And our other feature is this maple syrup right from the Engels Sugar Bush in Owen, Wisconsin. And it's actually a school forest that set up this pretty big maple syrup operation. They make tons and tons of maple syrup, and it's really delicious. Travis Engel is an egg ed teacher. And so if you want maple syrup from his school forest or to go check it out, you can contact him. He wasn't able to join today, but he said, like, definitely contact him, and it's cool to check out. And so these are just some seasonal reminders that tell us that, like, hey, what can we pay attention to? And we can connect to different change and who's here in place. And so what I was gonna do for this tea and tapas was actually to have a pancake off, but I didn't get a chance to make pancakes today because it is March Madness, and so things are a little bit crazy. And I'm gonna suggest that you could have a pancake off, and in the pancakes, you can just chop up those little raspberry buds that are little packs of nutrition. So it's kind of like a nut, and then throw it on into those pancakes. And then oops, I forgot to grab that one thing. The raspberries you could make into a jam, and then, or a berry compote with the delicious syrup, and you could taste test them and see what wins with those seasonal reminders. And there's also ways to make raspberry leaf tea. And you'll see some of the pictures there are from a gathering that we did last spring, summer, as things were getting green, and we collected raspberry leaves and dried them out, and you can make tea. And actually we have one special guest here, Melissa, who was part of that process. So if I heard you were just making some tea, so if you want to tell us about the tea, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so I knew you were doing raspberries and maple syrup, and I've never put maple syrup in tea before. So I decided to just combine the two from the leaves that we picked last year. I still have about half a jar, and then some local maple syrup, and it's absolutely delicious. Absolutely delicious.
All right, so thumbs up on the maple syrup in the tea. Actually, Becca Franzen, who's a professor that works with us at the Wisconsin Center for Environmental Ed, taps maple trees, and maple syrup takes a lot of energy to process and boil down. And so she said, oh, well, instead of doing that, I just keep the raw sap that's coming out of the tree. And she's like, I make coffee with that, I make tea with that. So just another idea on that front. And then Natalie, you had also some cool things for our tea and tapas session of seasonal foods.
Yeah, I go more toward, is my screen working? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome, okay. I probably turned myself off, but I actually have some deer antlers that I found while I was trail running in the Northern Kettles earlier this week. But last night for dinner, I actually did make venison steaks from a deer that I harvested this last fall. But unfortunately, me and my husband ate them all. So I could not bring any to show you the venison steaks, but that is one part of being in Wisconsin and being a steward of the environment that I enjoy. I only bow hunt because for me, it's more challenging and more fair. And I only harvest does on my parents' farm because of all of the damage that deer do to it's like those little raspberries. They just absolutely love them. They'll gobble them right up. So I'm trying to do my part with thinning the herd a little bit and doing a little bit of wildlife management.
Cool. And so there's two things I want to kind of riff off of there. One is that this is Natalie Weeks. She'll be a special guest with us today. She's been working on a NGSS Fire in Our Forests in Wisconsin storyline, and she just has been prototyping it with her students. And so she's going to reflect a little bit on that. And then the second thing is that I think it's super cool that she is an awesome hunter and she teaches hunter safety in her classes too. So two little tidbits about Natalie. And then we have a few other guests in here, and I didn't make this an official announcement. So if anyone else has any tea and tapas that they want to share, I'll sit in kind of awkward silence for a little bit, just in case there's other people that brought a tea and tapas for us today. All right, cool. And I kind of want to make this an informal space. So if at any point in time you want to contribute or ask questions, feel free to use the chat. And I might ask some questions in the chat today too, just to get a little bit more participation. But you can definitely feel free to unmute yourself. You can turn your camera off. You can do whatever, whenever. It's a free space to interrupt. And with that, some of our themes are going to be fire. So we will be talking about fire as a phenomenon in different ecosystems that relate to particularly raspberries and succession. So fire is a disruptor that says, hey, let's go back to the beginning of this cycle of growth, and we'll learn a little bit more about that. And then we're going to think about storylines a little bit more broadly, and then how you might be able to implement them in a national next generation science standard or in some of your other classes. So again, feel free to interrupt at any point in time with questions, and let's see what we got coming up next. Oh, this was something, even though that, emergency broadcast was really confusing, and I don't really know, sometimes tech stuff just happens. I thought this was an interesting thing, thinking about maple syrup and timing and when it's happening. This is from the Glyphwick phenology calendar. And they go by a moon calendar, and you can see that the maple sugar moon is usually in April, and we're clearly not in April. So just kind of something to think about as we're talking about these two different plants. And then related to the raspberry, in just this idea of inquiry and thinking about storylines, I have a picture here. I collected these raspberry buds today, and they were from two different spots and two different plants. And so I was gonna say in the chat, if you wanna just kind of think about what might have been making those buds so different. And there could be lots of different answers. So that goes out to everyone, and just throw any of your ideas into the chat, because something that's really cool about storylines is that they're places where we can have inquiry just based on questions and kind of drive our own curiosity. So my curiosity question is, why do those two raspberries look so different? You can see the buds are at different stages. If I were going to eat one, I'd probably want to do the one on the right because it looks like the one on the left is kind of budding out already. And so it's a little bit more bitter, and the one on the right is a little bit nuttier, which you can take away as a, I'm going to harvest some raspberry buds too. And I see in the chat, we have varying levels of light. So that's a really good guess. So maybe one's in a more shady spot or facing a different direction. And that's actually super true. One has an east side facing, it's kind of on an east side facing hill. And the other one is on a west side facing hill. So that's a really good guess. Someone else has water conditions, which could totally be a possible thing to study. You could set up like, you can take water levels through with a special device that I don't know what it's called right now. But you can see how much soil moisture is in places. So you could test like, oh, do these have different soil moistures? So really good guess. And I think I've given people enough time to participate. So one of the big answers is that we found also when we were harvesting our raspberry leaves, I forgot to say that these were from the same plants that the tea is coming from, that Melissa was talking about, and that I have in a jar here. But the one plant on the right is actually more of a house raspberry plant. So it's really focused on making super big berries as its thing. And then the one on the left is in a forested environment, or it's in an apartment complex on a hill. And it's in a pretty sunny location. And both of them actually are full sun, but the one at the apartment complex on the left is more of a woods raspberry. So it's not like a domesticated species. And so we noticed those differences in the leaves too, as we were harvesting raspberries for leaves this summer. So anyway, just a few inquiry questions for you to think about as we're thinking about storylines and our tea and tapas sessions today. And I just wanted to give a big overview of what I think of as a storyline. And then Natalie, if you want to chime in too and kind of interpret this more from a next generation science standpoint, you totally can. But one thing that's really cool for me, that is what a storyline means and embodies, is that it's a living thing that you connect to yourself, and it's growing, and you are thinking about place, and it's based on your experiences. And it really, as you're learning about more things, it includes your agency and directorship. And then it can encourage creativity and self-expression. And the reason I'm saying this is, as I was trying to think about guests and people to to bring on for this tea and tapas session, especially maple syrup, because there's a lot of cool maple syrup stories going on in Wisconsin and our school forests, and teachers are doing a lot of cool stuff with maple syrup. And some of you might have memories with maple syrup too. But as I was thinking about like who to have on, I thought, oh, it would be cool to have on my first maple syrup person memory. And that happens to be a teacher that wasn't able to come today either because of this March Madness phenomenon. But she's a teacher, and it was an outdoor club at her house, and we were boiling down maple sap, and she had a kid that was a son about my age, and of course we were throwing like snowballs because there were snowballs still out, but as you know, snow gets a little bit crusty nowadays. And then it was by all this maple syrup stuff, which is a little bit sticky because it's got sugar in it. And so it made some pretty interesting snowballs. And I just remember getting hit with this one that was like a sappy, hard, like ice ball. But it was so fun to be outside and making maple syrup. And it's one of these clear memories and storylines that I have. And so I just wanted to start off with that as an introduction to what a storyline is. And I'm not sure, Natalie, do you want to add anything on into that?
Sure. So for NGSS storylining, it's basically a new way to actually present information to middle school, high school, even elementary students, where in the past, we pretty much just give them information. When they take the test, they regurgitate the information and then promptly forget all of the information. And I was getting really, really sick of that. This is my 8th year teaching, although with COVID, it seems like this is my 20th year teaching. But I was just getting so sick of kids getting information, memorizing it for a test, and regurgitating it. So what we do in order to teach, or what I do in order to teach, is I give them a phenomena of sorts. We watch some sort of a video clip or a short part of a TED Talk or anything like that. And then I have them ask questions. And usually it's so funny that the questions are exactly things that I've planned that we are going to talk about. When I'm giving them the information as well, it's not a lot of memorizing terms or vocab or anything like that. It's looking at data sets and looking at what we can piece together to help make sense of the phenomena. So what I've been working on is the phenomena of wildfires in the upper Midwest, because all of our studying and school stuff about it is very, very focused on the West Coast and the Western United States, when we have a very active fire regime in Wisconsin. So that's what I've been focusing on, but I've also done storylines in my regular biology class right now with the ecosystem balance between kelp urchins and otters and what fossil fuels have to do with that and all that good stuff. And it just makes kids way more engaged because they become part of the story.
Awesome. That was a really great summary of that. Did anyone have any questions for Natalie or me on storylines? I'm just going to give a second to do that, or actually on any of the tea and tapas stuff, and or how you might use them or harvest them or things like that. All right, so without any questions, though if I missed you, feel free still to interrupt me. Today we're really going to focus on this tale of two systems and ecological design. And the maple tree is a tree that represents a pretty shade tolerant later succession species. It generally likes kind of wet soils that are more nutrient rich. And then the raspberry plant, on the other hand, probably some of you have had run-ins with those thorns and things. And we'll go with pine as the tree that's part of its community there, just to simplify things, though you'll be able to find raspberries everywhere and in fields. They're shade intolerant, so they really like sunny conditions. And anytime you have a disturbance, it's making sun. And so it likes that edge habitat, which means it's kind of an early succession species. And it does okay in lots of different kinds of soils, but it can do well in dry and sandy soil as it's thinking about that. And so that's what we're going to focus on with our species. And just to kind of help you understand, like, what does this actually mean if succession and forestry is a new concept for you? I want you to pick out one of these trees, and you're going to become one of these trees today. And you might want to take a few notes about like who it is. These trees come from a leaf lesson in the 5-6 unit on succession, which, oops, I forgot to mention, we'll have a Google Drive with all the resources that we talk about. So you don't have to keep track of them. We may put links in the chat and things too, but those will all be in the Google Drive. So anyway, this comes from a leaf lesson that's in the Google Drive. And I want you to take on one of these trees. And as we're learning about different concepts, just think about, okay, if I'm the aspen, what does this mean for me? And I'll give you space to kind of talk about that and think about some of these more ecological scientific concepts that we're going to be doing. So I hope I've been long-winded enough in my explanation that you've chosen a tree for yourself. And I'm just going to keep on moving. Here's a little bit more notes on your tree. And again, that goes with succession and where in a cycle of succession you're coming in. So aspen and birch are some of the first ones to enter. Then we get some white pine coming in as the aspen and birch are shading things out. And then they actually don't do so well in shadier conditions. So they're starting to like die off, and we get some new species. And that's kind of what we're thinking about with succession. And you can see maple's one of those later succession species. So they're very shade tolerant. If they're a little baby seedling growing up, it can be super shady. And they're like, man, I'm just gonna chill here until an opening happens. And we get these cycles of succession. All right, and to start thinking about our tea and tapas features in this lens too, we're gonna start off with Maple Nation, this is a concept that comes from one of my cool mentors, Robin Kimmerer, and part of her Braiding Sweetgrass book. And it's just sort of a diagram to think about what would happen if we thought about a nation in terms of trees. So Maple Nation would kind of start in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and then stretch over to the East Coast. And thinking about being a citizen of that Maple Nation with a little bit of different boundaries. And Natalie actually talked a little bit about honoring and building those ecocultural relationships and biocultural stewardship already. And so I'm just going to keep on moving if I can click in the right spot. And like I said, we have a lot of maple syrup stories in Wisconsin and a lot of cool school forest things. But this one I really liked because as we're thinking about storylines, you can think about those aha phenomenon moments. And in school, we think about them applied to standards, but in a larger life sense, maple sugaring is one of those storylines that a lot of people can connect to. And so this is just an example in Maple Grove and how they're starting to create those intergenerational ecocultural connections that are tied to a particular species. And so Dawn Nan made this video for us, and I'm just going to go ahead and play it.
Hi, my name is Dawn Nunn. I'm the teaching principal out at Maple Grove, and I'd like to take you on a quick visit to our first graders who are currently emptying their bags of sap and getting ready to begin the cooking process, which we will start this weekend. So here's some of our children hard at work.
All right, and this is about last week, actually, just to give you a little bit on timing. And here we'll see the children. And I'm just going to point us to this article that Dawn was working on for a newspaper, I just need to move some of the tabs out of my browser way so I can read it. And I'll play the video and then I'll kind of read this too. And there's some sound here, but it's not too important. So anyway, back in 1972, the Wausau Daily Herald ran a story on Maple Grove's first graders tapping the school trees for the first time. In that article, Laverne Henricks helped to tap those first trees with his son Todd, who was the first grade. They tapped 8 trees and collected about 90 gallons of sap.
So we're gonna quick take a little run up here to where the
This
sugar
week,
shack
oops,
is.
I'm gonna pause it. Oops, if I
We've had
can.
quite a-
So anyway, I'm gonna speed it up, but we're gonna see the cooking process in a second here. They only did 90 gallons of sap, but the great grandpa Laverne and great uncle Todd Henrik stopped by the sugar shack where Jordan was doing it this year, and he was bottling a jar of maple syrup for his mom, Kate, that they're gonna get at this Mother's Day breakfast. And Laverne, the older generation, found the first tree that he tapped, which has been turned into a wood carving, and then they could like go through time and look at the holes. But it's this idea of intergenerational connections and the power we have in school systems and school projects that I think is really cool, that I wanted to highlight with maple syrup storylines. So let me play the rest of this video. And
families donate wood already, so you can see we got quite a bit going on here.
You got any more to do, Autumn?
All right,
Okay.
here's our
You want to walk up to?
sap extraordinaire cooker, Mr. Dieter.
You want to walk up and dump my green pails?
And here is our cooking station. So already we've got the sap ready to go in here.
You can dump that one if it's.
And
Who else?
all of these barrels over here are already full of sap ready to go. So with that, we've got about 170 so gallons, and we probably get about 3 gallons of syrup out of there. So again, this is a job the first graders take on. And then they will be preparing syrup for the Mother's Day pancake breakfast that takes place right around Mother's Day.
Whose name is on that one?
All right.
Huh? Oh, Miss Etten.
Here we go. We've got more coming back already. That one's Miss Sutton's as well?
Yeah, you can
Excellent. Does it seem like it's pretty heavy?
take the bag off and just bring it to me.
All right. Excellent. Nice job, first graders, working as a team.
all right, so I thought those were pretty cool videos and a really cool example of how we can start building these storylines in lots of different senses. Oops. Sorry, I'm not the greatest at tech stuff yet. And I did just want to highlight, as we're thinking about these storylines and connecting them to our lifelong learning and ecocultural connections, tree sap has been used as a source of nutrients in the spring in the boreal and hemiboreal regions of both here in North America and Europe and Asia. And this was a more scientific article from the Acta Societatis Botanicorum Polonia, which I probably did not do a very good job of pronouncing, but it's actually the oldest scientific journal in promoting all aspects of plant science functioning since in Poland since 1923. And it was just kind of a cool cultural connection that is fun to think about when we're thinking about ourselves and place. And this is a EuroAsian example, and you can see all the different cultural connections of people using sap, which actually, when I was reading this article, it was super cool because my grandma's ancestors had been in the Volga River region, and she talks about it, and her grandma came over and had like 4 kids on a boat and like had to go from Russia over to like England in a train, and it's like, whoa. And so anyway, just kind of connecting these stories of self and place and then phenomenon to what we're learning about. And then also in this place, it's important to include Indigenous perspective. And here's some resources I found on Menominee stories of place, and the Menominee clan story is a really great resource at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. Some of the stories have recordings that go along with them, and you get these, the clan system is one of the like government and organization, like social organizational systems in Menominee. But one thing that is important with the story of maple sugar is that it's all about respect and the significance of things. And because it's so much work to boil down maple sap, we saw the cooking system that Dawn had set up. But it's like, you know, for every 40 gallons of stuff that comes out of the tree, you get 1 gallon of maple syrup. So it's a really good lesson in respecting like significant things. And then the other resources, this Milwaukee Public Museum, I wasn't quite sure on how they came about all these things. But one thing that I'd say when collecting stories, especially about Indigenous folks, is to make sure it's not like a vague, like a Native person once said, and then quote. And so this is very Menominee specific. There's a lot of other tribes in Wisconsin, so probably Ho-Chunk might have their own maple sugar story. The Anishinaabe up north might have their own maple syrup story, and they have different bands. And so there could be multiple stories going on here, and just creating space for that diversity. And one way to also see if like these resources are legitimate or not, here you can see that there's the story is talking about like, this was too easy for folks to be using. And so that goes along with that idea of respect, and that like, oh, we should be working for these gifts that the land is giving us. And so those are a couple different ecocultural connections related to the maple tree in particular. And then let's skip over that one. Here's a techie option of how you could use the maple tree as a connection point, as a phenomenon that you're like, oh, let's explore this a little bit more. This is the Wisconsin Community Tree Map. And one of our students who took the course was looking at how he could use the tree map to broaden the sugaring community in his school district. And so he filtered for all the different maple trees that were in the area, and then also filtered for good or better condition, so he could locate, you know, oh, we could be tapping all those trees. And one thing that you might be thinking as I'm going on and on and on about maple syrup is like, well, that's great, Kate, but I don't have any sugar maples, you know, in my schoolyard or even in my school forest, because, you know, they like nutrient rich soil and they're a later succession species. So a lot of forests don't have maple trees. But there's a lot of different trees that you can use to tap. Sugar maple is used because it's got the highest sugar content. So here you can see some of the ratios that different species have. And you can see that a lot of other species have lower sugar contents. But I did just want to say, like silver maple, Norway maple, and box elder are all trees that are found in urban environments. This came from a really great article called 27 Trees to Tap for Syrup. So that's like 27 trees. This was in Vermont, but a lot of the species are the same. So you could try them out at your own school sites. And the biggest difference is there's probably going to be some taste differences. So box elder kind of tastes like sorghum. And then a lady that I am working with on some curriculum updates is doing some tapping up north, and she was like, yeah, we tried experimenting with birch last year, but it really tasted like almost like medicine, and I don't like it. And so each of these trees will have different flavors, and you can see that birch, rather than like a 40-to-1 ratio, which is already a lot, has like 110 gallons of stuff coming out of the tree for every gallon of syrup and finished product that you get. And generally, birch trees are a little bit later in their tapping season, so their sap starts flowing a little bit later. And you could even do both trees actually within the same season. And once you start broadening how this was a quiz, but let's skip it. Once you start broadening your variety of trees that you can think about in this kind of tapping process that you're going through, there was one school that set up an experiment and was going to try tapping all these different trees and do like little taste tests, but it didn't work so well because of different weather conditions. And I don't know this for sure, but I would guess that each of these trees might have different sap flow times and different times where their sugar content is highest and lowest. And then once things start budding out, they're putting photosynthesis chemicals into the syrup, which changes the flavor too. Some people say it starts tasting a little bit grassy. And so I want to encourage everyone that tapping is something that you can do, whether you're in an urban area or up in the North Woods or in a really sandy soil, or, or if you have a whole sugar bush in your backyard. I really am encouraging you all to tap. And as we're thinking about sugar maple and different cultural connections, this is something about the sugar producers that exist around. And you can see that with climate change, the sugar maple is expected to not do so well, and that production rates will probably go down quite a bit too. So that's another story. Climate change, a whole nother storyline that you could definitely get into. And some storylines, like this is a forest products storyline that takes the wood from the Menominee forest in Wisconsin to the Final Four basketball court. There's a really cool video that goes through that story. And then this is like a super cool alert for all of you participants. It's not being broadcast this year, but the Wisconsin Maple Syrup Producers Association, maybe it was 2 years ago because it was probably COVID last year. They put together these kits and they were giving them away for free, but they still have kits. And so I contacted Teresa Braun, who's the executive director, and if anyone wants a kit to start tapping a tree in your neighborhood, you can get the kit. It comes with all the stuff that you need. And you just need to contact Teresa and she'd be happy to hook you up with one of those kits. So I think that's pretty cool. And you do need to figure out how you're going to cook it down. But I worked at a school in New York City and they worked with their kitchen staff to be able to use some of the burners and just put it in a big pot and then boiled it down and had it basically running all day. So you don't even need like a big evaporator setup. All right. Oops, I did something. Am I still going here for folks that are?
I can still see your screen.
Okay, is it still on the PowerPoint?
Yep.
All right, let me just go back myself to the PowerPoint then. Okay, minor error on my operator error part. So anyway, get your maple syrup kit. And then as I was going to get my raspberry buds, I'm taking way too long. As I was going to get my raspberry buds, as I was thinking about spring happenings and how exciting of a time it is and all the storylines that you can connect to, and wheels of change and things like that. Here's, I found Canadian geese. That was like one of the first days that I found Canadian geese last week or two. So anyway, and then I ran into a lady at the library today and she was like, oh, my geese started laying their eggs already today. And we were kind of complaining about the snow. But as things change a little bit, there's some bigger phenomenon to think about. With that, I need to take a small break, and so I'm going to play this song from a friend of mine, and he does social justice work out in Philadelphia. We've been having a lot of diversity and inclusivity discussions in the Wisconsin Center for Environmental Education, and he and his band do work like this. And, oops, that's not what I want to do. Am I sharing my Tea and Tapas calendar event right now, which is not what I want to do?
Yeah.
Okay, let me try again. Thanks for giving me feedback there, Jacob. All right. Is it on the Tea and Tapas City Love page?
You should be all set.
All right, cool. So anyway, I'm gonna take a quick bathroom break because I need to go to the bathroom all the time right now because I'm gonna have a baby in a while. And so here you go. And it's just a time, if you have stuff that you need to do for a little bit, go ahead and take a little break. And the song is about stardust, and we're gonna be thinking about succession and change next. And there's some cool stuff in there that relates to how we are all stardust and the big picture of change and succession. So here you all go. The song is 2 minutes, so you have a 2-minute break.
You have it muted. You're gonna want to.
Okay, hang on. I see where I'm going wrong. Thanks. I'm still not the greatest at technology things. Oops. Let's
All
start.
good.
All right. So 2 minutes, starting now.
Yo, Caselli, did you know we're made of the same ingredients that the stars in the sky are made of?
Wow, really?
Come on.
I like spiders,
I like bees.
I say por favor.
I say please.
We're all happy as we can be. We're all made of stars. We're all made of stars. I walk to school.
I ride my bike.
Me gusta bailar.
I like to hike.
We're so different and we're so alike. We're all made of stars. We're all made of stars. Different ways, different colors. We're all stars, let's love one another. Different ways, different colors. We're all stars, let's love one another. You like me, and I like you. Me gusta rojo.
I like azul.
We're all different, and that's so cool. We're all made of stars. We're all made of stars. We're all made of stars.
Look up at the stars in the sky. Aren't they beautiful? Just like every one of us. Did you know that the Earth, the Moon, the oceans, ice cream, dinosaurs, spaghetti, and even all of us are made of stardust? Many of the ingredients that make us were formed inside stars, and when these stars exploded, they shared these ingredients with the universe around them, which allowed us to come into being. So we all share the same origin. We're a part of the universe, and the universe is a part of us. And even though we can all be so different from one another, we are all made of the same thing. We are all made of stardust.
All right. So actually there's a whole album that's really good. They made a children's album, and they do social justice workshops, education workshops with different school districts and different community organizations, universities. And if you're interested in doing such a workshop, they're really awesome. They came and did one with a group of undergraduate leaders I was working with when I was at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. And they can tie things into different, any storyline. I think we were kind of thinking about place and what that meant to us in a university setting. But they have a whole album, and you can get it for free, or you can make donations. And if you're interested in doing one of their workshops, they have set pricing, but they can work around anything. So don't let pricing or anything scare you away. And I encourage you to check out the album because it's a kids album that's pretty fun. So that's the end of the justice break, which was mostly so that I could go to the bathroom, and that was my justice for the day. All right, so back to the PowerPoint. Are we good on PowerPoint screen share now?
Yeah, we're back on the
Okay,
PowerPoint.
cool. And I'm just going to check to see if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, we're going to shift to the big scale and a story of time and change that I'm going to do in a super abbreviated format so that we can hear from Natalie. Oops, let me just pull up my chat quick. It's hard doing this with only one screen. Okay, so yes, we're Tale of Two Systems, ecosystem. Oh, look at those cool raspberry buds. You can see it's like sunny there. There's some openings and those brambles are just coming in. And if you were to picture your tree and you think about like, you know, place and where you might be, we've done that already. This is a super cool video where you can see the ice sheets rolling in. So as we're thinking about place and change, this is pretty fun. And then, oops. Uh-oh, my screen's not moving anymore. Oh, there we go. When we're thinking about scales of change and succession, this is a longer term forestry history that goes from 100 to 1500 AD. And I have a little bit of background in forestry, so I can look at species and be like, oh yeah, that one's like less shade tolerant and this one's more shade tolerant. And one of the major disturbance cycles in Wisconsin and succession is fires. And so this is just a way to kind of look at that. And then in a similar way, this is the map of pre-Euro-American settlement and land cover, and you can look at the different species. So like hemlock and birch, or hemlock and hemlock's a late succession species. So you can see that there's a lot of late succession stuff up here. And then if you look at pines like jack pine and red pine, those are very young succession species. So there would have been fire there sometime soon, and probably someone was starting those fires and has been since time immemorial as we're thinking about fire. And going to the leaf lesson, here's just a couple definitions. There's a lesson that's super duper cool. Nothing succeeds like succession that I'll put in the Google Drive, but it teaches you how to make like a flip chart that goes through how to visualize succession with students. So that's a fun project. Let's skip that one. And here you can look at the tree that you were assigned and think about where you might fall on a shade intolerant. So that's like sunny conditions. There was a disturbance recently, and it's like all the lights coming in, and I'm aspen. I have these seeds that go like crazy in the wind, and I can land lots of different places. And when there's an opening, I'm going to find it. Whereas if you're a maple, you probably want some shadier stuff and everything in between. Lots of good. Oh, here's just a couple examples of disturbance and you know, what could cause them that are within that lesson. And you play a board game and kind of think through that with your students of, you know, what tree are you and when would you come on to the board game scene? And then when we're talking about fire and how its role in succession and ecosystems, there's a few different factors that make things more or less prone to fire. So you can look at fuel load and structure, and I'm going to turn it over to Natalie here in a second, but she goes through she uses fire as a phenomenon to investigate, and then her students look at a lot of these factors that could be influencing the phenomenon. So in terms of fire, you can see that in this picture, there's all this like dry needles that are there that are like really good they're going to start on fire quick. And you can also see that this is creating a ladder for fire to jump, which is an important component of fire. Looking at the ingredients is something that's really important when you're considering fires. So here you can see there's some pine cones in there. Pines are pretty smart about how they have evolved. So they're like, oh, we like fire. Let's put some extra flammables in our cones. And some of them even need fire to like open their cones. It's called serotinous. And so that's one of the things to think about, that like, oh yeah, those leaves are ready to burn, and they might have some extra chemicals in them that make them really good at burning. And even the structure of the leaf litter layer, when you look at pines, there's like a lot of air in there. So you can think about, like, if you're starting a campfire, you might want some space, and then oxygen is one of the main ingredients. And so generally the pine floor is good at making things very nice for starting fire. And then just thinking about moisture content too. We have a Wildland Fire Kit that's awesome, and you can check it out. And then we have our upcoming series. This is our website again, and you can find stuff, and oops, that's not for this one. You can find stuff on our website. And with that, I feel like I've been talking a mile a minute. And so I'm gonna hand it over to Natalie, and we're recording this, Natalie, so we said 4 to 5, but you're totally welcome to just keep on running, because I've been long-winded and running myself. So oops, and I never restarted my video. Good one, Kate. So anyway, let me stop my share, and I'll hand it over to Natalie to talk about how she's been feeling doing this fire succession storyline, well, just fire in general, I guess, storyline with her students. And it's local, place-based, and you just did it with all your students. So I'm excited to hear more about it.
Yeah, so I've been working on teaching students forestry through the lens of fire, because otherwise kids don't think trees are as exciting as we do as adults. But I tell them they do get exciting. I also found it really, really interesting. So I am in Random Lake, Wisconsin. So right about there on the old Wisconsin hand map, right at the bottom of Sheboygan County. And when I ask students, have you ever been to a state forest? A lot of them say, no, I didn't know that we had state forests or anything like that. And that always kind of takes me aback, but I find it all the time. So what we really like to do in this class is make them aware of the wilderness that is in the state of Wisconsin. So we talk a lot about the northern kettles because they are right in our backyard, and we talk a lot about the trees that exist there. So this is just a picture of my class. It's a pretty diverse group. I'm actually getting a new group, or I'm keeping these kids and adding 10 more. And I have special ed students that do really, really well with the storyline. I have some ELL students that are English language learners that do really, really well, even without things being translated, because we're looking at data and we're looking at pictures, which is really, really helpful for them. So something else I also did with my students is we went to a sugar bush at a nearby nature center. And normally their maple sugaring program is for elementary school students. But I said, I have 30 kids that are willing to work, and work they did. And they helped collect sap, and they were so adorable collecting sap. And they had so much fun running around in the woods collecting sap. So then that led us into talking about which trees are fire resistant and which trees are fire tolerant. So sugar maples are a very fragile species in the fact that they don't really like fire. They typically burn up in fire. And one of the reasons why is with fuel moisture. So this is one of the things we looked at in our lab, is the students had to come up with a way to predict how much moisture is in their fuel. So we actually started our whole storyline with the Cottonville fire phenomenon that is in the 7-8 lesson, but I basically gave them less information and less leading than you would a middle school class. They had to learn about fire towers, and they had to learn about mapping and using compasses. And then we looked at—
Before you move on, I'm just gonna tell people that don't know, sorry to interrupt, but the Cottonville fire lesson is one of the leaf lessons. And basically it's this, there was a fire back in the 1990s, I think. And it's kind of this investigation that students go through to figure out what happened in this fire that burned like several thousand acres in Wisconsin. And it allows students to like look at like, okay, what direction was the wind going? How did the fire move? Who are the people that were involved in the fire, and why might this fire start? So when you say Cottonville fire lesson, that's kind of the starting point if you're not sure what that means.
Awesome, thank you. So then going through, we looked at other different things after going through that lesson that can influence fire. So they actually devised a method to collect moisture, and they decided that they wanted to test moisture in conifers that we have on campus, as well as deciduous trees. So you can see they gathered all of their leaf litter and clippings from the trees and canisters, and then they let them dry out over a couple of days, and then they weighed them before and after and calculated moisture percentages. From there, we had a nice discussion about why fire seasons happen when they do, and they were able to correctly guess that it was due to the moisture inside. So some other things that we also did is I taught them how to light fires. So kids love that. They even brought marshmallows to school, and we had s'mores in our courtyard. But we made some ash out of the things that they dried. And then we mixed that ash in with soil so they could see the nutrients that were actually elevated or taken away after fire went through an area. So it's a really cool, easy lab that you can do where you burn some things. I taught the kids how to use flints and different fire starting techniques, and we got some ash and we mixed it in with dirt and did nutrient testing, and you can actually see a noticeable change in pH, which is cool, as well as potassium and a little bit of phosphorus. So it was really, really neat for them to see those differences just by adding ash into that ecosystem.
I want to say that's so cool, and a little whoop whoop to s'mores and school food connections.
And then another lab that we did that they absolutely loved is they wanted to investigate how fire actually travels on a landscape. So they made a little hill right here and some mountains, and I'll see if I can get this to play. So this is me lighting all of these off. And I'll stop it right here. So you can actually see that the fire stops on the top crest of this mountain, which is what it would do actually in nature because of preheating and how we set these up with the wind. And then it takes actually a really long time for that fire to go down the other side. And you can see the model in front, that group's model actually collapsed, but we had a really great conversation about how theirs basically lit on fire all at the same time, and why wildland firefighters would need to know differences in topography. And the kids were able to figure that out right away, which was really, really cool to see them make a model and then come up with connections to what we were learning in class and kind of doing their own inquiry, which is a really great thing about using these teaching storylines. So we'll go on to the next one. And then my proud moment was I showed the students these pictures from a weekend trail run I was on with some of my friends. And I said to them, you know, all of the snow is melting, but there's still some ice left behind. And I noticed that most of the ice that was left behind was in the stands of deciduous trees, when this stand of pine trees, there was no moisture at all, no mud. And then I said to them, why? And I had them try to figure it out. So with everything they learned, they knew that pine trees are going to have really, really deep roots. So they are going to have more water in them year round. So they're going to be sucking that water out of the ground year round because of all of the moisture levels in the fuel. They also know from our soil lab that pine trees love living in sandy soil, and that sandy soil is going to filter water down to the underground aquifers a lot faster because of all of the sandy soil that we have here in Wisconsin. And they also knew from watching the Wisconsin Forest Story video, which is also part of the LEAF curriculum, that these trees were most likely planted by a civilian conservation corps. And they could tell me all of that just after going through the storyline. So I thought that that was really, really cool. and just kind of a testament to once you know these basic facts and information and learning it in a storyline, you can start to ask your own questions like, why is there no mud in this pines tree stand? Why is there only mud by the deciduous trees? And then actually have an answer to it, which I thought was really, really neat for my students to be able to figure out after we went through this whole storyline process. So that is about it for the pictures that I have to show with that. So I'm working on condensing this lesson a little bit. We also did reading tree rings and a lot of other fun stuff with the students. I'm working on putting this lesson together to actually give to educators in a format that you can spend 3 weeks in class doing, or a little bit longer even for people that want to go more in depth with some things. And it's definitely at an upper high school level, which is really, really nice because a lot of times, a lot of resources are for younger students. So it's nice to have an option for older students as well. And that's all I got on that, unless anybody has any questions at all.
I was going to say that's super awesome. And it's been really fun working with Natalie on this project because storylines are something that are emerging right now. And a lot of folks aren't sure either how to teach them or how to design them because it is very student led and really driving that student process of learning. And it's been really cool to see all the different resources that Natalie's been pulling together. And it's in a format right now, and we're going to work on like making it more user friendly for everyone. But if it's something that you're interested in, go ahead and shoot me an email, and we can let you know and keep you posted when it's ready to go for the masses. Or if you want it early and to try and prototype it with your students, you'd be more than welcome to do that too. And I think it's so cool too to see how well those fire models worked. That video was great. And just the amazing like process of your students being able to be like, oh yeah, what is that phenomenon, and answering your question that you found. And so awesome job. And I do want to open it up. Do people have questions for Natalie? She's really a great expert in storylines, though she'll probably say, no, I'm not an expert, but I don't think anyone is totally an expert. And she's been practicing with students and designing a storyline. So she's a good person to ask with questions.
I have a question, Natalie.
Mm-hmm.
So was your initial phenomenon for this the maple syrup work?
The initial phenomena was looking at the Cottonville fire,
Okay.
and then figuring out where the fire went and all of those different things. It would be really, really easy if it timed out in the year to make maple syrup the original phenomena, and then looking at different tree species and different things like that. That's what I really like about the storylining, is that the individual lessons and vignettes, you can actually make any phenomena work with them. Like for instance, right now in my regular biology class, we're talking about homeostasis, and it led us into talking about fossil fuels and ocean acidification and how that impacts shelled critters in the ocean and kelp populations and different things like that. And there's lots of little lessons that you can fit in. It just so happens that I wanted to take my kids on a field trip.
Yeah, it's great that students are learning to make connections between things that seem so different. And that's one of the difficulties with teaching climate change in general, is that people just seem to think that everything is disconnected, and the more connections they can make, the better, I think. Thank you. This looks awesome.
And I kind of want to just say, doesn't everyone want Natalie as their high school science teacher? I think it sounds like you make really fun classes that are super engaging.
Just because I teach my students how to light fires.
Well, that's
we also
part
had
of it.
we had a worm battle as well.
Cool. I'm going to look in the chat and see if we have any more questions. And I'm going to invite people. We're a pretty small crew. And so if you have questions and you feel comfortable, just go ahead and unmute yourself or unvideo yourself as you're maybe doing that or not doing that. I'll just keep blathering away. But I wanted to just say that we kind of introduced a lot of different ideas from the big maple syrup, intergenerational, kind of meaningful inside connection to some of these scientific phenomenon. And I think, like Natalie said, the idea, and Steve too, how that there's these very different related concepts, but you can start seeing those interconnections when you start thinking and learning from a storyline, and that you become the director in that storyline learning, which I think is a really great pedagogical approach. So with that, does anyone have any other questions or comments on any of the stuff that we've talked about today?
So Natalie, so in your lessons, do you also like do you talk about prescribed burning and all that too as well?
Yeah, we do. Typically every year I also Google Meet in with a hot shot. It didn't work out this year because the hot shot we were going to meet with, there was a fire. So he couldn't, because he worked at Hawaii Volcano National Park and there was a flare up. But yeah, we do talk about that, and it's really neat because we are in a very small rural community. So while we were talking about suppression techniques in the Cottonville fire, a couple of my students were texting their dads that were on volunteer fire departments and saying, where's our meetup spot? Where do we go if there's a huge fire in town? So that kind of stuff was really cool for them to connect that to their family life of being on a fire department.
And I want to say, as you were talking about kind of being from a small community, Teresa is one of the participants here, and I think it was referring to you, but she was like, my alma mater. So there's a small community connection for you too. Cool. All right, well, we're a little past 5, so I just want to give one last call for questions. Again, if you want any of these resources that we talked about, they'll be in the Google Drive, so you can easily access them there. Jacob's been awesome about getting all this stuff into the chat, but if you're like me, I never transfer the things from the chat into my like actual memory stores, and so they'll also be in that Google Drive doc. And then I see Melissa has videoed herself, so I'm not sure if you want to be put on the spot or not, but I'm going to.
Go for it. What's up?
Oh, I don't know. I just was wondering if you needed, if you had something to say and you were signaling. Okay. And then, well, what do you think, Melissa? Melissa works for us. She's part of the KEEP program, which is the Energy Ed program. And I'd be curious to know your thoughts. And then what I'll do is kind of leave that as the last thing, unless other folks have more comments.
Thoughts on what specifically?
On anything that you've heard today, which has been a lot. So
yeah, there's been a lot. No, I think one of the things that I appreciate the most is the great connections that you're making with your students and helping them not only connect locally, but then think about things beyond. I think that local component is missing a lot, right? There's always great examples of out west or in a different country. And as someone who went to school in Florida and Illinois, there wasn't as many accessible things that were as local to us, like these relief lessons. So I appreciate you doing that and really making those connections like hit home.
Cool. And there's Odin in the background. He's quite a character, just so he gets a little bit of word on this recording too. Thanks for those comments. All right, any last thoughts? Otherwise, we'll end the meeting. And thanks so much for joining us. If you have any questions, my email is kflick@uwsp.edu, and you can just contact the LEAF program. Other than that, let me just go back to the chat. Cool. Looks like we're good to go. So thanks again, everyone, for joining, and have a good night. Gute Nacht und schlaft gut.